The gunshot that echoed through the saloon that Thursday afternoon in August of 1876 changed everything, but not in the way Victoria Novak expected when she dove under the poker table, clutching her leather satchel full of primers and reading books to her chest. She had arrived in Laramie, Wyoming territory only 3 days prior, stepping off the Union Pacific Railroad with dreams of establishing herself as a proper schoolteacher in this rough frontier town. The advertisement she had answered back in Philadelphia had promised a growing community in need of educated women to bring civilization to the West. What it had not mentioned was that civilization seemed to be losing its battle against chaos on a daily basis. The shooting stopped as quickly as it started. Victoria remained under the table, her heart hammering against her ribs, her breathing shallow and quick. Boots shuffled past her hiding spot, and she heard men shouting, the sound of someone being dragged across the wooden floor, and then finally, an uncomfortable silence that felt almost worse than the violence. "Miss, you can come out now," a deep voice said from somewhere above her. "It is over." Victoria peered out from beneath the table's edge and found herself looking at a pair of dusty brown boots, leather chaps. And eventually, as her gaze traveled upward, a man who stood well over 6 feet tall with shoulders that seemed to block out the afternoon sun streaming through the saloon windows. He had removed his hat and held it respectfully in his hands, revealing dark hair that needed a trim and eyes the color of winter sky. "Are you hurt?" he asked, extending a calloused hand toward her. She shook her head and accepted his help, emerging from her hiding spot with as much dignity as she could muster. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, and dust covered the front of her modest gray traveling dress. "Thank you. I am fine, just startled. I was looking for someone when the trouble started. Looking for someone in a saloon." The man's expression showed confusion rather than judgment. "You are not from around here." "No, I am from Philadelphia. I am the new schoolteacher, Victoria Novak. I was told I might find Caleb Armstrong here." "Do you know him?" The man's weather-beaten face registered surprise, then something that might have been embarrassment. "I am Caleb Armstrong." Victoria studied him with fresh eyes. This was the man she had been sent to find. The man who had left an urgent message at her boarding house requesting her services for private tutoring. She had expected a young boy, perhaps a teenager struggling with his studies, not this imposing cowboy who looked to be in his mid-20s, only a few years older than her own 22 years. "You are Caleb Armstrong," she repeated, unable to hide her surprise. "But the message said you needed help with reading." His jaw tightened, and she saw color rise in his cheeks despite the tan of his skin. "Yes, madam, that would be correct. I need help learning to read." "I figured since you are the new teacher and all, you might be willing to take on a student who is not exactly school age anymore." The vulnerability in his admission struck her harder than any bullet could have. Here stood a man who had just calmly dealt with a shooting, who clearly commanded respect in this rough town based on how others moved around him, and yet he had the courage to admit he could not raid. Victoria felt her initial shock transform into respect. "I see. Well, Mr. Armstrong, I would be happy to help you, though perhaps we could arrange our lessons somewhere less likely to involve gunfire." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I reckon that would be for the best. My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town. I could come to you, or I could send my wagon to fetch you. Whatever makes you most comfortable, Miss Novak." "You have a ranch?" she asked, then felt foolish for her surprise. "Forgive me, I am still learning about life out here. No offense taken. Yes, I have a cattle ranch. Been running it for 3 years now since my father passed. It is doing well enough, but there is a problem." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. A man who cannot read is at the mercy of those who can. I have been lucky so far, had my foreman Marcus helping me with the paperwork and such, but he is getting on in years and wants to retire back east. I need to be able to handle my own affairs, read my own contracts, manage my own books. Victoria nodded, understanding the practical concern behind his request. In the West, a man's ability to run his business independently could mean the difference between success and failure, between keeping his land and losing everything. I understand completely, Mr. Armstrong. When would you like to begin? Would tomorrow be too soon? I could pick you up at your boarding house around noon, bring you out to the ranch. I will have you back before dark, and I will pay you double what you make at the school. I have not actually started at the school yet, Victoria admitted. Classes do not begin for another 2 weeks, so tomorrow would be perfect. Though I must ask, why did you never learn to read, if that is not too personal a question? Caleb placed his hat back on his head, and for a moment she thought he might not answer. Then he sighed. My mother died when I was 6. My father was a hard man, believed book learning was a waste of time when there was work to be done. By the time I was old enough to go against his wishes, I was too ashamed to admit I did not know my letters. Seemed easier to just keep pretending, keep making excuses. The raw honesty in his words touched something deep in Victoria's chest. Then we will start with the very basics tomorrow. I promise you, Mr. Armstrong, there is no shame in learning. The only shame would be in refusing to try. He met her eyes then, and she saw gratitude there mixed with something else she could not quite name. Thank you, Miss Novak. You do not know what this means to me. As Victoria walked back to her boarding house that afternoon, her satchel still clutched tightly, she found herself thinking about Caleb Armstrong in ways that were entirely improper for a respectable schoolteacher. There had been something about the way he looked at her, something honest and open that she had rarely encountered in the supposedly civilized men back east. She reminded herself firmly that this was a professional arrangement, nothing more. She would teach him to read, he would pay her, and that would be the extent of their relationship. The next day, Victoria dressed carefully in a practical navy skirt and white shirtwaist, pinning her long, dark hair into a neat bun at the base of her neck. She had her teaching materials prepared in her satchel, along with a slate and chalk for practice. When Caleb arrived precisely at noon in a well-maintained wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses, she was waiting on the front porch of the boarding house. Good afternoon, Miss Novak, he greeted her, jumping down from the wagon seat with easy grace. He had cleaned up since yesterday, she noticed. His face was freshly shaved, his shirt was pressed, and he smelled faintly of soap and leather. Ready for your first day teaching the most stubborn student you will likely ever encounter, she laughed despite herself. I doubt you are as stubborn as some of the students I taught back in Philadelphia. At least you actually want to learn. The ride out to his ranch gave Victoria her first real look at the Wyoming landscape. The endless sky stretched above them, so vast it made her feel both insignificant and somehow more alive than she had ever felt in the crowded streets of Philadelphia. Prairie grass rippled in waves across the rolling hills, and in the distance she could see the purple shadows of mountains. It is beautiful, she said quietly. Caleb glanced at her, seeming pleased by her reaction. You think so? Some folks find it too empty, too lonely. My mother was from Boston, and she never did quite take to it. But I cannot imagine living anywhere else. All this space, all this freedom, makes a man feel like he can breathe. The Armstrong ranch, when they reached it, was larger and more prosperous looking than Victoria had anticipated. The main house was a solid 2-story structure built from local timber and stone, with a wide porch and real glass windows. Nearby stood a substantial barn, several outbuildings and corrals where cattle grazed peacefully in the afternoon sun. "You have built quite an operation here," Victoria observed as Caleb helped her down from the wagon. "It has been hard work, but it is mine." "Well, ours now, I suppose. My younger sister Charlotte lives here too, though she is in town today visiting friends. You will meet her eventually. She is 17 and thinks she knows everything." He said this with obvious affection. Caleb led Victoria into the house, and she was surprised by how well kept everything was. The main room was spacious and clean, with comfortable furniture, and even a few books on a shelf that she suspected were more for decoration than use. He noticed her looking at them. "Those were my mother's," he explained. "I have kept them all these years, even though I cannot read them. Seemed important to hold on to them somehow. Maybe someday I will actually know what stories she loved so much." They settled at the dining table, and Victoria spread out her materials. "We will start with the alphabet," she said, pulling out a large card with printed letters. "Do you know any of your letters at all?" Caleb studied the card with intense concentration. "I know some of them. I can recognize my name when I see it written, and a few other words I have memorized by sight, but I could not sound out a new word to save my life." "That is a start," Victoria said encouragingly. "Many people learn to recognize certain words by sight before they learn to read properly. Now, let us begin with A." For the next 2 hours, Victoria guided Caleb through the alphabet, showing him how each letter was formed, what sound it made. He was an attentive student, focused and determined, though she could see frustration building when he struggled to remember which letter was which. "This is harder than breaking a wild horse," he muttered after mixing up his B's and D's for the 3rd time. "You did not learn to break horses in one afternoon," Victoria pointed out gently. "Learning to read takes time and practice. You are actually doing quite well for your first lesson." He looked up at her, and she was struck by the intensity in his blue eyes. "You are patient. I appreciate that. I was worried you would think I was stupid." "I do not think you are stupid at all, Mr. Armstrong. You run a successful ranch, you clearly have good business sense, and you have the courage to admit you need help. Those are all signs of intelligence." "Caleb," he said suddenly, "if we are going to be spending time together like this, you should call me Caleb. Mr. Armstrong makes me feel like you are talking to my father's ghost." "Only if you call me Victoria," she replied, knowing she was probably crossing some line of propriety but not particularly caring. Out here in Wyoming, the strict social rules of Philadelphia seemed less important somehow. As promised, Caleb had her back to town well before dark. When he helped her down from the wagon in front of her boarding house, his hands lingered on her waist just a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Same time next week?" he asked. "I think we should meet twice a week if you want to make real progress," Victoria suggested. "Mondays and Thursdays, perhaps?" "Twice a week," Caleb agreed, and the smile he gave her made her stomach flutter in a way that was entirely inappropriate. "I will be here Thursday at noon." Over the following weeks, Victoria fell into a comfortable rhythm. She began teaching at the small schoolhouse in Laramie, working with children ranging from 6 to 14 in a one-room building that desperately needed repairs. In the evenings and on her days off, she prepared lessons for Caleb, carefully choosing reading materials that would hold his interest while building his skills. Their Tuesday and Thursday sessions at the ranch became the highlight of her week, though she tried not to examine too closely why that was. Caleb was proving to be a dedicated student, practicing diligently between lessons. By the end of the first month, he could sound out simple words and was beginning to read basic sentences. "The cat sat on the mat," he read aloud slowly, then looked up at her with a grin. "I am reading. I am actually reading real words." Victoria felt a surge of pride and joy at his accomplishment. You are doing wonderfully, Caleb. She had also gotten to know him beyond their student-teacher relationship. He often insisted she stay for dinner after their lessons, and over meals prepared by Charlotte, who had indeed turned out to be as spirited as Caleb had warned. Victoria learned more about his life. His father had come west during the gold rush but had settled on ranching instead. His mother had tried to make the best of frontier life, but had never stopped missing Boston. When she died of pneumonia during a harsh winter, something had broken in his father, making him even harder and more distant. He blamed himself for bringing her out here, Caleb told Victoria one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie. Maybe he was right to. Maybe she would have lived longer back east. Or maybe she would have died anyway, Victoria said gently. Pneumonia kills people in cities too, Caleb, and she chose to come here with him, did she not? That means she loved him enough to take that risk. He was quiet for a long moment. I never thought of it that way. I always just focused on how unhappy she seemed sometimes, how she would look east with this longing in her eyes. But you are right. She chose to be here. She chose him, chose us. As autumn painted the prairie grass gold and red, Victoria realized she was falling in love with Caleb Armstrong. It was not something she had planned or even wanted. She had come west to build an independent life as a teacher, not to tie herself to a rancher. But somehow, during those hours teaching him to read, watching his face light up when he successfully decoded a new word, listening to his stories about ranch life and his dreams for the future, her heart had decided to betray her practical plans. She told herself it was one-sided, that Caleb saw her as nothing more than his teacher. Then came the day in late October when everything changed. They had been working on a more advanced text, a short story from one of his mother's books. Caleb was reading aloud, slowly but accurately, when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Victoria looked up from her notes to find him staring at her with an expression she could not quite read. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Did you come across a word you do not know?" "Victoria," he said, setting the book down carefully. "I need to tell you something, and I am probably going to say it all wrong because I have never been good with words, spoken or written." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" "I think I am falling in love with you." The words came out in a rush, unpolished and raw. "I know that is probably not what you want to hear, and I know I am just a cowboy who is barely learning to read while you are this educated woman from the city. But I cannot keep pretending I only think of you as my teacher. You are the first person I think about when I wake up, and the last person I think about before I sleep. On the days when we do not have lessons, I find myself looking for excuses to ride into town just on the chance I might see you. And I know this is probably going to ruin everything, but I could not keep it inside anymore." Victoria sat frozen, torn between the joy of hearing him say the words she had dreamed about and the fear of what admitting her own feelings might mean. "Caleb, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything," he said quickly, standing up from the table. "I should not have said anything. Let us just forget I mentioned it and go back to the lesson." "No," Victoria said, standing as well. "No, we cannot just forget it, and I do not want to." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I am falling in love with you too. I have been trying to stay professional and proper, but the truth is that I care about you far more than a teacher should care about her student." The relief and joy that flooded Caleb's face was beautiful to see. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides and took her hands in his. "You mean that? You really mean that?" "Yes," she whispered. "I mean it." He started to lean down toward her, then hesitated. "May I kiss you?" Instead of answering with words, Victoria rose on her toes and closed the distance between them herself. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but then Caleb's arms came around her and pulled her closer, and Victoria felt something inside her catch fire. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she had to grab the edge of the table to steady herself. "Well," she said, trying to catch her breath. "That was not very professional of me," Caleb laughed, a sound of pure happiness. "To hell with professional. Victoria Novak, would you allow me to court you properly? I want to do this right. I want to take you to church socials and dances, let everyone in Laramie know that I am trying to win your heart." "You have already won my heart," Victoria said, touching his face gently. "But yes, I would very much like for you to court me properly." The courtship that followed was the happiest time of Victoria's life. Caleb proved to be as dedicated to winning her love as he had been to learning his letters. He picked her up for church every Sunday in his best suit, sitting proudly beside her in the pew. He took her to town dances, and despite his claims that he was not much of a dancer, held her close and moved her around the floor with surprising grace. He brought her flowers he picked himself from the prairie, wildflowers in colors she had never imagined existed. The people of Laramie quickly accepted their relationship. Victoria had proven herself a capable and caring teacher, and Caleb was well respected in the community. Some of the town's more judgmental ladies initially whispered about the propriety of a schoolteacher courting a student, but those whispers died quickly when it became obvious how much Caleb and Victoria cared for each other. Charlotte became one of Victoria's closest friends, delighted to have another woman around and already making plans for a wedding that had not been proposed yet. "He is going to ask you to marry him," Charlotte confided one afternoon when Victoria came to the ranch for a lesson. "I found him practicing writing your name the other day, Victoria Armstrong. He had written it about 50 times. Victoria felt her cheeks heat. "We have only been courting for 2 months, Charlotte. It is too soon to think about marriage." "Not out here it is not," Charlotte countered. "And not when two people are as clearly meant for each other as you and my brother. Besides, I heard him talking to Marcus about rings. He is going to ask you soon, I know it." Charlotte was right. On Christmas Eve, after a simple service at the church, Caleb drove Victoria out to the ranch even though it was late and snow was beginning to fall. The house was decorated with pine branches and candles, and a fire crackled warmly in the hearth. "I have a gift for you," Caleb said, reaching into his coat pocket. "Well, 2 gifts actually. The first gift was a book, bound in beautiful leather." Victoria opened it carefully and found that it was a journal, and on the first page, in careful, slightly awkward handwriting, Caleb had written, "To Victoria, who taught me to read so I could write down all the reasons I love you. Merry Christmas, 1876. "Oh, Caleb," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "This is beautiful. Turn the page," he said softly. She did, and found he had filled several pages with a list, each item written in his steadily improving hand. "You are kind. You are patient. You make me laugh. You are beautiful. You are smart. You believe in me. You make me want to be better. You are brave. You left everything you knew to come west. You see beauty in the prairie. You are gentle with my sister. You never made me feel stupid. You smell like lavender. Your smile lights up every room. I love how you concentrate when you read. I love how you explain things. I love your laugh. I love everything about you." The list went on for 3 full pages, and by the time Victoria finished reading, she was crying openly. "I do not know what to say. This is the most wonderful gift anyone has ever given me." "I am not done," Caleb said, and suddenly he was kneeling in front of her, pulling a small box from his other pocket. "Victoria Novak, you came into my life and changed everything. You taught me to read, but you also taught me what it means to really love someone, to trust someone with your whole heart. I know I am just a rancher and you are this incredible, educated woman who could probably do a lot better, but I love you with everything I am. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small but beautiful diamond. It was not the largest ring or the fanciest, but it was perfect. "Yes," Victoria said through her tears. "Yes, absolutely yes. And Caleb, you are not just a rancher. You are the kindest, most honest, hardest working man I have ever met. You are brave and strong and gentle. I could not possibly do better because there is no one better than you." Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her forget about the cold night outside, about everything except the feeling of being held by the man she loved. They were married in February of 1877 in the small church in Laramie. It was not a large wedding, but it was filled with warmth and love. Victoria wore a simple white dress that Charlotte had helped her sew, and Caleb wore his best suit, looking both nervous and happier than she had ever seen him. Marcus stood up as his best man, and Charlotte served as Victoria's maid of honor, when the preacher asked Caleb if he took Victoria to be his lawfully wedded wife. His "I do" rang out clear and strong through the church. And when it was Victoria's turn, she looked into his blue eyes and said, "I do," with absolute certainty, knowing she was making the right choice. The kiss they shared as husband and wife was met with applause and cheers from the assembled guests. As they walked back down the aisle together, Victoria felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she was meant to be, with this man, in this wild and beautiful place. Victoria continued teaching at the school after their marriage, and Caleb continued his reading lessons, though now they took place in the evenings in their shared bedroom, often interrupted by kisses and laughter. His reading had progressed remarkably. He could now handle most of the ranch paperwork himself, could read letters and contracts without help, and had even started reading books for pleasure. One evening in late spring, Victoria found him sitting on the porch with one of his mother's books open in his lap, tears streaming down his face. "Caleb, what is wrong?" she asked, rushing to his side. He looked up at her with a smile despite his tears. "Nothing is wrong. I am reading my mother's favorite book. Charlotte told me which one it was. It is a collection of poetry, and Victoria, it is beautiful. All these years I have kept her books but could not read them, could not understand why she loved them. Now I can. I can read her notes in the margins, see which passages she marked as her favorites. It is like getting to know her again, even though she has been gone for so long." Victoria sat beside him and took his hand. "I am so glad. She would be proud of you, you know, proud of the man you have become, of everything you have built here." "I hope so," he said quietly. "I think she would have liked you very much. You both came west and found a way to make it your home." As spring turned to summer, Victoria began to suspect she was pregnant. When the doctor in town confirmed her suspicion, she could barely contain her joy. That evening, she waited until after dinner to tell Caleb, pulling him outside to their favorite spot on the porch where they often sat and watched the sunset. "I have some news," she said, taking his hands in hers. "We are going to have a baby." Caleb's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, shock, then pure, unfiltered joy. "A baby! We are having a baby. Are you certain?" The doctor confirmed it this morning. "I am about 3 months along, which means the baby should arrive sometime in December." Caleb let out a whoop of excitement and picked Victoria up, spinning her around before suddenly stopping, looking worried. "Wait, should I be doing that? Is it safe? I do not want to hurt you or the baby." Victoria laughed, touching his face gently. "We are fine. The baby is fine." You can still hug me, Caleb. He pulled her close, more gently this time, and she felt him trembling slightly. A baby. We are going to be parents. Victoria, I am terrified and excited, and I do not even know what else. That makes two of us, she admitted, but we will figure it out together. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. Victoria had to stop teaching at the school in November, much to the disappointment of her students, but she promised to return after the baby was born if the school board would have her back. Caleb was attentive almost to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying about her health and comfort. Charlotte was even more excited than Caleb, if that was possible, already knitting baby clothes and planning how she would help with the new arrival. I am going to be the best aunt, she declared regularly. This baby is going to be so spoiled. On a cold December night, 3 weeks before Christmas, Victoria went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Caleb, pacing anxiously in the hallway outside their bedroom, thought he might lose his mind from worry. But finally, as dawn broke over the prairie, Victoria gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When the midwife placed the tiny, red-faced infant in Caleb's arms for the first time, he looked down at his son with an expression of absolute awe. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Victoria, you did it. He is perfect." They named him Thomas James Armstrong after both of their fathers. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Caleb was a devoted father, taking to parenthood with the same dedication he brought to everything else. He would sit for hours with Thomas in his arms, reading to him from books even though the baby was far too young to understand. "It is never too early to start learning to love stories," Caleb explained to Victoria when she found them like that one afternoon. "Besides, I am making up for lost time. I want him to grow up always knowing how to read, never struggling the way I did." "He will," Victoria assured him, "and if he ever does struggle, he will have the two of us to help him." Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Victoria did return to teaching when Thomas was 6 months old, bringing him with her to school in a cradle she kept near her desk. The students loved having a baby in the classroom and were always eager to help watch over him during recess. Charlotte eventually married a young rancher named Peter from a neighboring property, moving only a few miles away. She and Victoria remained close friends, and their children would eventually grow up together, running wild across the prairie in a pack of cousins and friends. As the years passed, Caleb's reading continued to improve until there was no trace left of the man who had once struggled with his letters. He became known in the community not just as a successful rancher, but as someone who could be trusted with contracts and agreements, someone who always read the fine print and dealt fairly with others. He sometimes helped neighboring ranchers who themselves struggled with reading, showing them the same patience Victoria had shown him. Victoria and Caleb had 2 more children, a daughter they named Sarah in 1880 and another son they named William in 1883. Their home was always full of noise and laughter, of children running through the halls and books scattered on every surface. Caleb read to all his children every night, making it a sacred ritual that none of them ever wanted to miss. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1887, Caleb gave Victoria another leather-bound journal. Inside, he had written her a letter in handwriting that had become confident and sure over the years. "My dearest Victoria," it began. 10 years ago, I could not have written you this letter. 10 years ago, I was a man trapped by his own ignorance, too ashamed to ask for help. Then you came into my life and everything changed. You taught me to read, but that was the smallest of the gifts you have given me. You taught me what it means to be brave, to admit weakness, to always keep learning and growing. You gave me love, a family, a life richer than I ever could have imagined. Every day with you is a gift. Every day I thank God that you answered that message from a desperate cowboy who needed a tutor. I love you more than words can express, whether written or spoken. Here is to 10 more years and 10 after that and forever beyond. Yours always, Caleb. Victoria read the letter through tears of joy, then pulled her husband into a kiss that held all the love and passion they still felt for each other after a decade of marriage. I love you too, she whispered against his lips. Thank you for taking a chance on that teacher from Philadelphia. Thank you for seeing past the cowboy who could not read, Caleb replied, and teaching me so much more than just letters. As the 19th century drew toward its close, Caleb and Victoria Armstrong remained fixtures in the Laramie community. Their ranch continued to prosper, their children grew strong and healthy, and their love for each other only deepened with time. Caleb sometimes joked that he had become the most well-read rancher in Wyoming territory, with a personal library that rivaled some of the collections back east. Victoria never stopped teaching, though she eventually left the school to focus on tutoring students privately, including several adults who, like Caleb, had never learned to read. She never judged them, never made them feel ashamed, always remembering what courage it had taken for her husband to ask for help all those years ago. Thomas grew up to be a thoughtful young man who loved books as much as ranching. Sarah had her mother's quick mind and her father's determination, declaring at age 12 that she intended to go to college someday, something both parents fully supported. William was still young but already showing signs of being as hardworking and honest as his father. On a warm summer evening in 1895, Caleb and Victoria sat on their porch, just as they had done countless times over the 18 years of their marriage. Their children were inside doing their evening chores, and for a moment, they had the peaceful Wyoming sunset to themselves. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked suddenly. "Giving up your life in Philadelphia, you could have been teaching at a fancy school back east, living a comfortable city life." Victoria looked at him in surprise. "Regret it? Caleb Armstrong, how could I possibly regret the best decision I ever made? This is my home. You are my home. These children, this life we have built together, this is everything I ever wanted, even if I did not know it when I first stepped off that train in Laramie." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I am glad. Because I cannot imagine my life without you. You gave me the ability to read, but more than that, you gave me a reason to want to learn, to grow, to be better. You saw something in me worth teaching, worth loving, and that changed everything." "You changed everything for me too," Victoria said softly. "You taught me what real love looks like, the kind that is not about fancy words or society rules, but about showing up every day, working hard, being honest and true. You taught me that strength comes in many forms, including the strength to admit you need help. You taught me that home is not a place, but the people you choose to build a life with." As the sun set over the Wyoming prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and purple, Caleb and Victoria Armstrong held each other close, surrounded by the life they had built together. It had started with a simple request for reading lessons, a desperate cowboy and a schoolteacher from Philadelphia. But it had become so much more than either of them could have imagined. Caleb had needed a tutor for reading, and Victoria had taught him his letters. But in return, he had taught her something far more valuable. He had taught her what it meant to truly love someone, to build a life together through hard work and dedication, to find beauty in wide, open spaces and simple moments. He had taught her that home was not about returning to the familiar streets of Philadelphia, but about creating something new in the wild and beautiful West. Their love story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic declarations, though it had its share of both. It was a story of patience and persistence, of two people who saw in each other something worth fighting for, worth believing in. It was a story of transformation, of a man who learned that admitting weakness was true strength, and a woman who learned that love could be found in the most unexpected places. As they sat together on that porch, their children's laughter drifting out from inside the house, Caleb picked up Victoria's hand and kissed it gently. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." "Thank you," Victoria replied, squeezing his hand, "for giving me a life beyond anything I dreamed was possible." The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Seasons came and went, children grew and eventually started families of their own. Thomas married a sweet young woman from town in 1898 and built a house on the far end of the Armstrong property, choosing to stay and work the ranch with his father. Sarah did indeed go to college, one of the first women from Laramie to do so, studying to become a teacher like her mother. William showed a talent for working with horses that had Caleb beaming with pride. Caleb and Victoria became grandparents in 1899, when Thomas and his wife welcomed a daughter. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Caleb looked at Victoria with tears in his eyes. "Can you believe this? We have a granddaughter. We are starting a whole new generation." "I can believe it," Victoria said, looking at her husband with all the love she felt. "Because I have learned that with you, anything is possible." They continued their tradition of reading together every night, now often with grandchildren piled around them, listening to stories just as their parents had before them. The library Caleb had built in their home had grown to hundreds of volumes, carefully maintained and well-loved, each book a testament to how far he had come from that day in the saloon when he had first admitted he could not read. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1902, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren, Charlotte and her family, Marcus, who had indeed retired but often visited from his new home in Denver, old friends from town, all came together to celebrate Caleb and Victoria's marriage. At dinner, Thomas stood and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast to my parents. Growing up, I watched them build not just a ranch, not just a family, but a partnership based on respect and love and constant learning. My father always told us that he was able to succeed because my mother taught him to read. But we all know she taught him so much more than that, just as he taught her what it means to make a home in this wild land." To Caleb and Victoria Armstrong, the best parents and grandparents anyone could ask for, may they have many more years together. The toast was echoed by everyone present, and Caleb stood, pulling Victoria up with him. "I am not much for speeches," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I want to say that every good thing in my life started the day I got up the courage to ask this woman for help. She changed my life in ways I am still discovering. Victoria, you are my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. Here is to 25 more years." He kissed her then, to the applause and cheers of their family and friends, and Victoria felt the same flutter in her stomach that she had felt all those years ago when he first admitted he was falling in love with her. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued around them, Caleb and Victoria slipped away to their favorite spot on the porch. It had been added onto over the years, expanded and improved, but this corner remained their special place, where they had shared so many conversations and quiet moments. "Are you happy?" Caleb asked, pulling her into his arms. It was a question he still asked regularly, even after 25 years of marriage, always wanting to make sure she had no regrets. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Victoria answered honestly. When I left Philadelphia all those years ago, I thought I was looking for independence and adventure. What I found was so much more. I found home. I found love. I found a life worth living. And I found it all because a brave cowboy admitted he needed help learning to read. I found it all because a brave teacher was willing to take a chance on teaching him, Caleb countered. And because she had the patience to see past what I could not do to what I could become. They stood there together as the stars came out over the Wyoming prairie, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, the births of their children and grandchildren, all the moments big and small that had made up their life together. The night air was cool and clear, and from inside the house they could hear music starting up, someone playing the piano and voices raised in song. "We should go back in," Victoria said reluctantly. "This party is for us after all." "In a minute," Caleb said, holding her a little tighter. "Let me just have one more moment with my wife, out here under these stars. Let me remember exactly how this feels, how grateful I am, how much I love you." "I love you too," Victoria whispered. "More than words can say, written or spoken." They returned to the party hand in hand, to their family and friends, to the life they had built together in the wild, beautiful West. The celebration went on late into the night, full of laughter and music and love, a perfect reflection of what Caleb and Victoria had created together. In the years that followed, they continued to add to their story. More grandchildren arrived, the ranch continued to prosper, and Caleb and Victoria remained as devoted to each other as they had been on their wedding day. Age touched them both gently, silver threading through Victoria's dark hair, lines deepening around Caleb's eyes, but neither minded. Each change was a mark of the years they had spent together, the life they had shared. Caleb never lost his love of reading. Even as an old man, he could be found most evenings with a book in hand, still marveling sometimes at the fact that the words on the page made sense to him now, that he could access all the knowledge and stories and ideas that had once been locked away from him. He made sure every child and grandchild in the Armstrong family learned to read early and well, never wanting any of them to struggle as he had. Victoria continued tutoring almost until her final days, always willing to help anyone who wanted to learn, regardless of their age or circumstances. She had helped dozens of adults in the Laramie area learn to read over the years, each one a tribute to the man who had first trusted her enough to admit his own struggles. On a bright spring morning in 1920, Caleb and Victoria celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them, sitting on their porch and watching the sunrise over land that had been their home for so long. They were both in their 70s now, grandparents many times over, pillars of the Laramie community. 43 years, Caleb mused, his hand finding Victoria's as naturally as breathing. "Sometimes it feels like just yesterday you walked into that saloon looking for me, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever." "Both are true," Victoria said, leaning against his shoulder. "Every day with you has been an adventure, but I cannot remember a time when I did not love you." "I wrote you something," Caleb said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "I know I have written you dozens of letters and poems and lists over the years, but I wanted to write you one more. For our anniversary." He unfolded the paper, and Victoria saw his handwriting, still clear and strong despite his age. He read aloud, "To my dearest Victoria, on our 43rd anniversary, you came into my life when I was lost, trapped by my inability to read, ashamed of my ignorance. You could have judged me, could have turned away, but instead you saw something in me worth teaching. You taught me my letters with patience and kindness, never making me feel less than, But the real lesson you taught me was about love. You showed me what it means to truly love someone, to build a life together, to face challenges hand in hand. Every word I have read, every book I have enjoyed, every letter I have written exists because you believed in me. But more than that, every moment of happiness, every child and grandchild, every sunrise and sunset we have shared exists because you chose to love me. I came to you needing a tutor for reading. You taught me letters. But what you really taught me was how to love, how to be loved, how to build a life worth living. Thank you for 43 years of being my teacher, my partner, my best friend, my love. I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Forever yours, Caleb. By the time he finished reading, they were both crying, holding each other close as they had done so many times over their long marriage. That was beautiful, Victoria whispered. And it is all true for me too. You taught me just as much as I taught you. You taught me about courage and honesty and what real strength looks like. You taught me that home is not a place but a person. You taught me what love really means. They sat together in comfortable silence, hand in hand, as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Around them, the ranch they had built together hummed with life. They could see some of their grandchildren in the distance, riding horses across the prairie. Through the open windows they could hear Charlotte, now a grandmother herself, laughing with one of her daughters in the kitchen. "We did good, didn't we?" Caleb said softly. "All of this, our family, our life, we did good." "We did very good," Victoria agreed. "We took a chance on each other, two people from different worlds who should never have met, and we built something beautiful." As the day went on, family began to arrive for the anniversary celebration that Sarah had insisted on organizing. Children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter and love. There was food and music and stories, so many stories of Caleb and Victoria and the life they had built together. Late in the evening, when most of the younger children had been put to bed, and the adults sat around the big dining table sharing coffee and conversation, Thomas brought out a large leather-bound book. "Mom, Dad, we made something for you," he said, opening the book to show them. "It is a family history. We interviewed everyone, collected photographs and stories and memories. Sarah wrote most of it, with help from Charlotte and me and all the others. We wanted you to have a record of everything you have built, everything you have created together." Victoria and Caleb paged through the book together, tears streaming down both their faces as they saw their life documented in words and pictures. There were photographs from their wedding, pictures of their children at various ages, drawings the grandchildren had made, stories written by family members about what Caleb and Victoria meant to them. "This is the most wonderful gift," Victoria said, touching the pages reverently. "Thank you. Thank you all." "We are the ones who should be thanking you," Charlotte said, speaking for everyone gathered. "You two showed all of us what love looks like, what it means to build a life together, to work hard and support each other, and never stop believing in each other. Every one of us here is here because you two fell in love. We are all part of your story." The celebration continued late into the night, and when everyone had finally gone home or gone to bed, Caleb and Victoria returned to their bedroom, the room they had shared for 43 years. Caleb carefully placed the family history book on the shelf next to all the other books he had collected over the years. All the proof that he had truly learned to read, had truly overcome his old shame. They lay in bed together, Victoria's head on Caleb's chest, his arms around her just as they had lain together thousands of nights before. "Thank you," Caleb whispered into her hair, "for everything, for taking a chance on me all those years ago, for teaching me to read, for loving me, for giving me this life. "Thank you," Victoria whispered back, "for asking me for help, for trusting me, for being brave enough to admit you needed to learn, for teaching me what love really means, for giving me a home and a family and a life I never dreamed possible." They fell asleep like that, in each other's arms, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Outside, the Wyoming stars shone down on the ranch they had created, the family they had raised, the legacy of love they would leave behind. Caleb and Victoria Armstrong would eventually pass away within months of each other in 1923, both having lived long, full, happy lives. Their funeral services were attended by hundreds of people whose lives they had touched. Former students, ranch hands, neighbors, fellow ranchers, adults whom Victoria had taught to read, all came to pay their respects to a couple who had exemplified the best of what the West could be. Their children and grandchildren continued to run the Armstrong Ranch, passing it down through the generations along with the story of how it all began. They told and retold the tale of how Caleb had needed a tutor for reading, how Victoria had come west to teach, how they had fallen in love over lessons about letters and words. They made sure every child in the Armstrong family knew that their legacy was built on love, on courage, on the willingness to admit weakness and seek help, on the patience to teach, and the determination to learn. The family history book that had been created for their 43rd anniversary was added to over the years, becoming a treasured family heirloom. In it, the story of Caleb and Victoria was preserved, along with a copy of that very first letter Caleb had written Victoria, the one where he had listed all the reasons he loved her in his careful, beginner's handwriting. That letter became the most precious page in the book, proof of how far love can take you, what you can accomplish when someone believes in you. And so the story lived on, passed down through generations of Armstrongs who grew up hearing about their great-great-grandparents who met because he needed a tutor for reading. She taught him letters, but he taught her love. Together, they built an empire of the heart, a family bound together by the same courage and patience and devotion that had marked their marriage from the very beginning. The Armstrong Ranch still stands today in Laramie, Wyoming, still owned and operated by descendants of Caleb and Victoria. On the porch where they spent so many evenings together, their great-great-great-grandchildren still sit and watch the sunset over the prairie, still read books together as a family, still tell the story of how it all began with a simple reading lesson that changed two lives forever. Because that is what love does. It takes two ordinary people and turns their story into something extraordinary. It takes a cowboy who cannot read and a teacher from Philadelphia and creates a legacy that lasts generations. It proves that the greatest lessons in life are not always the ones you expect to learn, and the greatest teachers are not always the ones you find in a classroom. Caleb needed a tutor for reading. Victoria taught him letters. But together, they taught each other the greatest lesson of all, that love, real love, is patient and kind and brave. It is the courage to admit your weaknesses and the grace to help others overcome theirs. It is building something together that neither of you could have built alone. It is finding home in another person and making that home a place of safety and joy and endless possibility. Their story ended as all good love stories should, not with fanfare or drama, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, a love well tended, a family well raised. In the end, they had everything that truly mattered, not because life was always easy, not because they never faced challenges, but because they faced everything together, hand in hand, heart to heart, from that first reading lesson to their final days. The lesson Caleb learned from Victoria was about more than letters and words. It was about trust and vulnerability and the transformative power of having someone believe in you. The lesson Victoria learned from Caleb was about more than courage and determination. It was about love in its truest form, stripped of pretense and propriety, raw and honest and real. Together, they created something that would outlast them both, a family built on the foundation of their love, a legacy of literacy and learning that would touch countless lives, and a story that would be told and retold for generations, reminding people that sometimes the most unlikely meetings lead to the most beautiful love stories, and that it is never too late to learn something new, especially when that something is how to truly open your heart to another person. He needed a tutor for reading. She taught him letters. He taught her love. And together they built a life that proved love is the greatest teacher of all,